Hey guys, how's it going? Jason Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, and well, I guess yesterday, as of recording, Riot did something really cool, and where they did a sort of sneak preview of the patch live on Twitch, and they had two of their devs. We have Plink over here, and then we have Julian on the right, and they essentially ran through the entire patch live on stream with us. And we got to see all the changes, and they talked a little bit about their reasoning, which is really cool because we also did, I and everyone else did get to see the patch one day ahead technically, so I can record this video and get it out to you guys on your regularly scheduled cadence on my channel. But I do have to say I've watched through this once already, and it's gonna be the second time going through, and this might be the craziest, most insane patch that they pushed through. Like, no cap, it's crazy. There's so many changes in so many different ways that are very fundamental to how the cards work, rather than just like numbers here and there for the most part. So very excited to jump through it, and there have been some big changes that I'm really expecting, and I want to see your guys' reaction on them. So without further ado, let's jump into the changes. Starting off, we have the Leona cards as well as the Daybreak cards. There's quite a few of them in the teaser, and I think Daybreak as an archetype got a pretty big overhaul. So let's see the first card here. All right, Leona. Okay, I can't do that. We'll just slow this down then, just so I have slightly more time just in case. But Leona, up to a 5-cost card. Everything else is the same, but it has Challenger and no longer has Overwhelm on level 2. Additionally, she gains a barrier for this round on when you activate a Daybreak. This is very, very interesting, because now, of course, Leona has 5-mana slot, which is Raven slot. Being slower, now there's no like really good 4-mana Daybreak cards, which is something that Leona has always tried to fill in this space. Her stat line wise, it's similar to like Thresh, and I think the Challenger move is definitely closer to how they design like champions when they take from League into LOR, because Leona's like this tank and she has like the Q that just like fires off the sword and drags, right? So Challenger is obviously very thematic. And barrier, of course, you know, her W that gives her the shield, raises the shield. Oops, let's go back a bit. So I think this is really interesting. It definitely depends on how the other cards look like, because right now we are lacking a 4-drop, and some of the other changes do affect what I think of the overall archetype and how it's going to look like. So let's just keep going. Sun Guardian used to be a 6-mana 4/4 Overwhelm that said Daybreak give me +2/+2, no, +4/+4. Now it's a 3-mana card that says Daybreak, or when you activate another Daybreak, grant me +1/+1. So Sun Guardian starts off as a 3/4, assuming you Daybreak it on turn 3, and then it grows. Just cute, because the 3-drop slot was only Priestess, which is a very low tempo play. Dropping this as a 3-mana 3/4 that scales is honestly not that bad. I think that's good because you want to unload some of the Daybreaks to a lower cost. And then Solari Stelicorn Daybreak 4-mana 3/4, give other allies +0/+2 this round. I think this card still sucks. It's only this round, and it's understated, and given how Daybreak has been played, I don't know how good this actually is. So let's say you play Sun Guardian 3/4, you play this next turn, Sun Guardian turns into 4/5, 4/7 for the turn. So maybe you get like a decent attack through, maybe it stops like some blocks, but this card isn't very impactful, I would say. If this was like Grant, that'd be a lot better. And sorry guys, I'm feeling a little bit sick and under the weather, so sorry if you can tell through my voice. But overall, I don't think Solari Stelicorn is still quite good enough. Like with the 4-drop slot, at the very least, there's a 5/4 lifesteal, which I think is potentially slightly more impactful, although both these cards haven't really seen much play. Here's where things get really interesting. Morning Light going down to a 3-mana card. It's a smaller buff, so it only gives allies +1/+1 this round. It still gives allies +1/+1 this round, but it only activates one ally's Daybreak effect. And this is a huge change, because I think Morning's Light with Leona was a really powerful finisher card, and this is no longer that finisher card anymore, right? It no longer has the requirement of being you no longer have to Daybreak this card in order to get the effect of activating a Daybreak. But I think this card is fundamentally weaker because now there's no real finisher in Leona's archetype as a Daybreak card. Because right now Leona is just sort of relegated to this sort of just mid-range kind of control-y tempo kind of game plan, and it kind of lacks a finisher. Now Leona doesn't have Overwhelm, things like that. So I'm very skeptical about this change overall. Sunburst, on the other hand, just costs 5. This change is fucking ridiculous. Everything's the same except for its cost, and it just costs 5. So even if you don't Daybreak, it's just a 5-mana deal 6. This card's insane. It's kind of cheating if you think about it. It's basically a Fallen Comet, but you can main deck it and it costs 5, right? So I think this card's really, really good. But again, like, I think that's overall. There might be a change to Raven because they did tease it. So I wonder if there's one. I forgot if there's one more change in the morning or the Daybreak archetype overall. But Leona is now fundamentally lacking like a finisher card, and you have to kind of go to other places for that. So very interested to see how that goes out. But if that's the last change, let's see. Yeah, so that's the last change for Daybreak. Yeah, so I think Sunburst, phenomenal change, very, very powerful. Morning Light, it's kind of like Inspiring Light now, right? Which is the 2-mana slow speed card that gives allies +1 or grants allies +1/+1. This, of course, only being for the rounds. Activates a ally's Daybreak effect. I don't know. I feel like the power level of 5-mana Morning Light that was +2/+2 and activate all Daybreak cards was so insanely strong on the right boards. Now this is less conditional in having to set it up, but its payoff is definitely a lot weaker. It's hard really to say if this card is better for worse until I actually get to play around with it. But right off the bat, I do feel like it is a nerf just because it used to be a finisher card, and now it's more of this like, I don't know, because like, this card is Inspiring Light's good in scouts because you have a very wide board and you can buff things up. You have rallies to trade down, and essentially they're making this Leona deck more like scouts, right? You have these like small, like sort of wide combat tricks. Morning's Light, which is like Inspiring Light. You have Stelicorn, which is like semi-like Sculptor. I'm not gonna say it's very close to that. And then you have like a stat 6 Sun Guardian that like kind of scales. So essentially you're just like, okay, I think the better knowledge is you're just like you're a Demacia deck now. Leona has basically become Demacia in flavor, where it's just playing for this like mid-range kind of stat stick style of deck, which I don't know how I feel about that. I do think Sun Guardian is a very decent change just because you have another 3-drop to reinforce your curve. Sunburst is phenomenal because now it's just overpowered. I'm not gonna say overpowered necessarily, but for the stats for the cost, it is very, very powerful. But Morning's Light losing the finisher, it's kind of tough. Like, I'm not confident to say this is a buff. Yeah, I don't know. Especially because this is also Leona's spell as well. Like, you can play it as like a 3-mana stun 1. Ugh, I don't know. We've lost our finisher. I'm very skeptical about this card. But let's continue. Okay, going over to the next one, we have Nocturne. Nocturne is relatively the same, except his level condition also counts fearsome allies, which is cool because now they're pulling Nocturne away from necessarily being a Nightfall champion, and now you can move it towards a fearsome deck, right? because Nocturne, when you get to flip him, is very, very powerful. Maybe you can run more low cost fearsome units in a more traditional Nightfall deck. Either way, his condition is a little bit more flexible in how you meet it, and if you can meet it quick enough, then his payoff is really, really good, right? A lot of fearsome units also don't require you to Nightfall, so if you have like even token, for example, maybe just play like 1-drop fearsome into Stygian, for example, and you can just proc Nocturne very, very quickly. Like you could go like Noxus Nocturne with like the 2/1 fearsome spider, right? And then you just play that card into that card Stygian on turn 1 into 2, and that's 3 procs for Nocturne. And you can flip Nocturne ideally on turn 4, and then you play him leveled on turn 5 and close the game on turn 6, something like that, right? I don't know how impactful that is. It definitely potentially helps you to take Nocturne away from Nightfall, which is, I think, always a good change when they remove champions away from their original sort of boundaries. So I'm very excited for this because anything like that is good. Like if they change Echo to a similar style where they could take him away from Shurima in the same sense that you can take Nocturne away from Targon, I think overall that's just a very good idea. Twisted Tree Line kind of has like the inverse side where now it sees Fearsome and Nightfall attack, Destroy Mina Summon, Foul Maul. Card still sucks, but Nocturne change overall I think is quite cool. There's no buff to the Nightfall archetype itself, but in potential change to Nocturne Fearsomes, Nocturne Spiders, Nocturne with Elise, right? I think that's very interesting kind of approach to kind of buffing cards by making their support cards, like the pool of them, a lot bigger. So I'm very happy with this change. And I also think it's quite good, because I think Nocturne overall is still just a very solid champ. Biomal gets attacks that buffs other Fearsomes have, allies have +1. So cool, great buff, but this card still sucks because you can't main deck it, and summoning it is a pain in the butt. So not much to say here. Let's go to the next one. Okay, now we're going to the nerfs. Let's see. Hate Spike back to 2 cost. Mark of Storm back to 2 damage. I think Mark of the Storm was expected, given how insanely powerful I think Ken and Ezreal became, given the fact that the breakpoint between 2 and 3 hits a lot more units. So I think this was quite expected, and this might just drop Ken and Ezreal back down to the ground, which I'm quite happy of. I don't really like playing against that deck. That's not to say that Ken and Ezreal is completely screwed over, because again, at the end of the day, it's a very polarizing deck, or it can be a very polarizing deck. And at the end of the day, if you don't need to kill things by dealing 3 damage to them, well, you can still kill them out. Ezreal still levels at the same speed, and your whole game plan is the same, right? This definitely affects decks where that breakpoint does matter a lot, where you need to kill 3 health units like Misfortune, things like that, Petrified Broadwing, and now having this like change, it definitely makes a lot of impact into decks that I think were generally good into Ken and Ezreal. So now Ken and Ezreal is back to being a super polarizing deck, but we're still in a very Ionia dominated meta, and Ken and Ezreal, generally speaking, does pretty well into those decks. Hate Spike though, I'm probably a little bit more surprised about. I don't know if Hate Spike was too strong at 1 mana, and I think that it's good to have strong cards like this, because they're not inherently like game breaking. It is very hard to play around in a similar sense that Flock is hard to play around, but at least Flock I guess was conditional, and this is just straight up a deal too. So I can understand why they would choose to revert it. The question is Hate Spike still a good card? And ultimately I'm not sure. Because what's good about being at 1 mana is you can play it with a 2-minute spell when you have 3 spell mana. Now you can't do that. Your mana breakpoint's gonna be a lot more awkward. I still think it's a relatively good card because it's still a Mystic Shot that can synergize with your deck and generates a husk. But this definitely does impact some decks like Heimer Nora, and like Kindred Nasus. So this is a huge change, or a huge nerf, those archetypes, because I definitely think this was one of their strongest kind of cards. So I'm very interested to see how those archetypes do, because I think this was what you could call like archetype defining, in a similar sense that I think Ravenous Flock is to a lot of different decks. And a change like this might just make it unplayable again. When it was 2 mana, it wasn't played, but maybe people think it's good now that they've had a moment to try it out, just like Vanguard Sergeant. When it was like a 3/4, all of a sudden people realized how insane 4 Mossy was, and then when it got reverted to 3/3, still sees play in Scout and other decks. So I don't know. Market Storm, positive change. Hate Spike, I like the card at 1 mana because I think it was cool. 2 mana definitely makes breakpoints more awkward, but still might be a decent card. Here's some interesting ones. Concurrent Timelines of 2 mana. I think some people were thinking 2 mana or 3 mana. Overall, very nice. You can't place on turn 1 into a 2-drop. This is notifiable now. Overall, solid change. Targon's Peak to a 6 mana card. Very good change as well. They're obviously trying to rein in high variance decks, as it says, and being able to Targon's Peak on turn 4 instead, or now you have to peak on turn 5 instead of turn 4, just gives you that extra time to either find an answer for the peak or to slow down how impactful the peak deck is. So overall fan of these changes. Viego, getting a additional cost and a +1/+1 stat line as well. I think some of us were expecting more of like a change to his level up condition, maybe making like 25, something like that. This change, I think, is probably a lot more impactful than simply changing how much it takes to level him up, because he just comes down and turns slower, right? He does curve into Hydrovine. Viego decks have found like a good 6-drop to play, which was Zelani, and now I think Viego decks are lacking like a good 5-drop play now, because now you don't have Viego to play. So now you're just making it, not only are you making Viego slower because, well, he comes down later, so you're generating miss slower, so he's leveling up slower, but you're also removing a crucial turn 5 for the deck. Especially in like Shrima Viego. It's a little bit less for or the Ionia Viego versions that could run like Kindred or Thresh, because then you have like a 4/5 drop to play. But overall, this is a huge hit to Viego because, well, I think slowing him down overall is just insane, because he's hitting the board slower. Evelyn Viego also getting a little bit of the brunt here. I do think Viego was inherently powerful, so I welcome a change like this. Because it's not obvious that I think Viego was a card that needed a nerf, but as a inherently powerful card that has very powerful effects, I think that Viego was on the list of getting a nerf eventually. Was this the way I would have went for it? Maybe. It's either that or increasing his level up condition, but I think slowing him down is probably a little bit healthier overall. Next card, Sign In, going down to health to 6 mana 3/3. Otherwise, everything else stays the same. I'll be honest, not a lot of decks play Sign In. It's pretty much in the past historically Kennen Ezreal as well as Ari Kennen. Having 5 health was relatively impactful because you could block. But I think his overall draw 2 plus the board buff was generally speaking the stronger thing. And if you want to protect him, you can. And you know, he's played in recall decks, so you could recall him if you wanted to keep him around. He still has 3 power, which I think is a lot more important. This isn't a huge deal, I think. I think decks that still will play him just because Ionia itself lacks draw. Especially if you're trying to play like a mono Ionia deck, you're still pretty reliant on having Sign In. Simply because he's pretty much the only draw card in your region. At least that's like good. So I still see this as like a relatively minor tap on the wrist. But it does mean that he might not be able to value trade. So, nah. not bad. Harrowing, +1 cost. It was kind of strange that they chose this time to target Harrowing. There's really only one deck that makes use of it, being the Gwen Katarina deck, and honestly, that deck was never playing Harrowing on turn 6 for the most part. Sometimes it did, which sucks, but this change honestly doesn't matter that much. I guess like TF Nami played as well. So you have like one less mana to work with on your turn. But for like a deck like Gwen Katarina, you never really needed your mana on the turn you played Harrowing. It just means that you're forced to play Harrowing like one turn later. Which I'm not entirely sure how much that matters for the relevant decks that play it right now. In the future, it might impact some decks. Still relatively surprised they chose this time to kind of touch up on it, because I don't really think it was that big of a deal. So, but for the current decks that do play Harrowing, I don't really see this as a very impactful change. It does mean that you can't Harrowing deny on turn 10. But those decks that did that have not been around for ages. So I don't really see this as too big of a change overall, but a nerf is still a nerf, and I guess like Anivia maybe, just because it has other spells it wants to play. Like, you are constricted to 3 mana at most on turn 10 if you play Harrowing. So, yeah. Why'd they go back to Sidon? Okay. Okay. Rite of Calling to 1 mana. Infinitely higher cost. They've been doing good with like the jokes here, so I can appreciate. But overall, yeah. This is a huge change. Like, when we talk about like increases in mana points, obviously a change between 0 and 1 is a lot bigger than 9 and 10. Even though they are all 1 mana, right? So this is huge. You can't play like 1 cost unit into Rite of Calling on turn 1 anymore. You can't like Rite of Calling into like Glimpse with 2 mana. Like, again, just breakpoints, right? In mana breakpoints are so huge. And I mean, yeah, this is a pretty big nerf. There's not really much to say about it. It's still going to be run in decks that want to tutor specific champions, because, well, it's the best tutor card for champ in the game anyways. So you're sort of forced to run it even if you're in Streama, but you will feel a little bit of a change because you can't go like 1 drop into this, or, you know, you have to bank mana for it, right? Which ultimately constricts it. Riptide Sermon only deals 3 to unit, still spawns 3, but only deals 1 to Nexus as well. I mean, again, very huge, right? Because when we talk about breakpoints between 3 and 4, that's like Nami, Victor, a lot of champions with 4 health no longer die to Riptide Sermon, right? Like Yasuo, you know, things like that. Or now if you like block and then your unit has 4 health, you can't get Riptide Sermon. That's huge. Obviously the burn to Nexus does matter as well, because this deck card was mostly used in aggressive slanting decks or burn decks as well. And so reducing the damage dealt to Nexus is really huge. Now, is this card still playable? I don't know. Like the spawn 3 was definitely like an impactful part of the card, but it's a lot less impactful if you're not killing a unit. Still deals damage to the Nexus, but still procs cards for plunder, and you can still kill units with 3 health. I think that this card is still fundamentally powerful when it does, but it's obviously not as strong anymore just because it doesn't kill as many things. If you're still killing a unit, dealing damage to the Nexus and spawning 3, a lot of mid-range decks still like this card. So Plunder is still going to play this card most likely. Scouts. Oh, it doesn't kill Veigar anymore either, huh? Wow. No. Like, I think decks, mid-range decks will still play this card. Burn decks like Pirates. I guess Pirates is still a mid-range deck. Pirates. Ooh. I think it's still okay in Pirates. It's just a lot less impactful. And now a lot of units or metas with 4 mana health units are going to be in a lot more advantageous position, because you can tank Sermon and then block a unit. That's big. I do like the change though. I think this is fair, and the card before was too strong. Decimate, 6 mana. Ooh, okay. There's not a lot to say about this one for me. I do think a lot of people were surprised to see Decimate being included in the nerfs, simply because, well, it was a finisher for most these burn aggressive decks, and still might be, but you can no longer double Decimate on turn. Was it 7? And again, just like constricting your mana options is so huge for a deck like this, especially like burn, where every point of mana matters. And when you're constricted at 1 extra mana, that might be that break point that, you know, you're not able to afford it. Obviously, other nerfs to cards like Captain Farron that generates decimates. You know, Ez Kennen or Ezreal Draven or Ezreal Caitlyn, whatever that deck is, still just catching strays. Maybe Silent decks that used to run 1 Farron's just getting hit. Decimate can now be generated off of like Pharaoh's Financer, synergizes with Jace and Lux. Some people out there are gonna say that's a nerf to their or buff to their decks, but like nerfs to like increased mana costs of burn spells really affects burn decks, obviously, because they value mana so highly, and they pretty much need to spend every point of mana in order to win a game. Especially with Sermon nerf, now they have less control over the board. They need to rely more on burn damage, and nerfs Decimate definitely sort of compound the issue that I think burn decks will face going into the future. So this is going to impact a lot of aggro decks, and they're going to have to rely more on just attack on board, which is like why I also think that the Nocturne buff is really in line with some of the changes. They're taking away some of the more burn potential in consideration of buffing some of the more mid-game units that I think aggro decks traditionally would like to use. And there are some changes to some spider cards later, so I could see spiders also going from this like aggro burn deck into more of this like aggro mid-range kind of deck, which I think is really cool because we're kind of getting a mix-up in how you know, these 2-year-old archetypes used to play out, and I think this like breath of fresh air is always a welcome change. Champ buffs. Kench. Hard taste on summon and round start instead of just round start. I mean, overall that's huge. The power of Tahm Kench was having that acquired taste in hand. If you're banking 2 mana into your turn 4 and you can play Tahm Kench with it, that's going to roadblock a lot of your opponents. So if Tahm Kench is viable, he's going to be strong. Is Tahm Kench going to be viable is a separate question, just given the fact that we have a very heavy Ionia meta again. If Tahm Kench gets, you know, recalled, then, well, all the capture units kind of get spewed out. It does fall in line with like Nami, like you play Kench on 4 and then you can acquire taste Nami on 4, like leveled, I guess Nami levels on 5, so never mind. You don't quite get to eat, or like if you played Kench on 4, you always get to eat Nami on 5 or Shelly on 5. And there's probably some relevant decks where hitting Blitz on turn 4 is really good. Like overall, it just speeds up your game plan as well. Like if you have Token on turn 4 and you can play Kench into like Victor, oh my god, there's a lot of good hits I think for Kench. And this change is definitely super impactful overall to making him viable. The question of whether or not he is going to be viable is a separate question, but this is a significant buff to Kench, and it's going to be interesting to see where he's going to slot in. Next change, Fiora. Oh my god, I remember the reaction to this one. Fiora from a 3 mana 3/2 to a 4 mana 4/4 challenger. I think this is one of the most insane changes we've seen today, because everything else about Fiora is the same. Now what's I think really insane about this change is that now she's just a decent unit, right? She's just a 4 mana 4/4 challenger. She's basically like Jace but in Demacia, and you don't have to, a lot of times with Fiora you don't have to play for the Fiora win con. It's just sort of an option they have on the side if everything just lines up. And the way you build your deck doesn't have to be any different than any sort of like Demacia mid-range deck, but you just happen to synergize so well with Fiora that you can sort of pressure this side goal of yours and just win the game on the spot. If you're coming down one turn later, means that against like aggro decks, maybe she's not like, you can't just like all in on Fiora into like an aggro deck and be okay now because he's 4 mana. But into any other traditional Demacia mid-range deck, you kind of is just like a roadblock, not only as a 4 mana 4/4 challenger, being able to like trade fairly now into almost anything, even without barrier or quick attack. I think that's the biggest part, because she can just be a good card, right? Maybe you just use her as a 4 mana 4/4 challenger, and then sometimes she's a 4 mana 5/5 challenger, and then sometimes she wins the game. But having the innate threat of having your opponent to focus resource on removing Fiora, that might not work out, or they have to over commit resources onto, that can help you commit to a separate game plan, I think is really, really insane. Like, what if like Fiora Kane is like good? I don't know. But overall, this is a huge buff to Fiora. I mean, this is insane. I think this is super scary, because now, again, when we talk about those breakpoints, Sturman doesn't kill Fiora anymore. Fiora does 4 damage, so can challenge any 4 health units now, which is huge. And you can still have the possibility of giving barrier, giving quick attack, giving some sort of support mechanic or stats to help her trade favorably. And I think this is probably one of the most insane changes we have seen today. Oh wait, there's even more insane changes coming up. You guys are in for a wild ride. Master Yi, his cost reduction is permanent. So you play him on turn 3. The next turn, he discounts a cost of a spell by 1 in hand. And then again, and it's permanent. This doesn't change the fact that Master Yi himself as a champion is a little bit weak, because he has no impact when he's played. But I think this is such an interesting sort of mechanic, and also just innately strong mechanic, that he might just be good as like, you know, he might just be good as a card, and then sometimes you level him and then he's like, you know, also does some extra move on the side. Now, where is this relevant? I'm not so sure. Maybe he's good in like a Field of Mina kind of deck where you have expensive spells like Bury Denies or Field Rush, and if you hit like a reduction on them, you can kind of surprise your opponent, or you can play them with Deny turns earlier. This kind of effect is definitely a lot stronger in slower decks than I think in a faster kind of archetype. But there might be some interesting things where maybe you can like curve out like 1 mana Mystic Shots, 3 mana Concussive Palms, and play for more like tempo focused like game plan. But overall, I see this more powerfully reducing the cost of expensive spells to play them cheaper and earlier, especially if you can discount them multiple times and you only have 1 spell in hand. But overall, like, permanent change is good. Like, a lot of times, if you hit a card that you didn't want to play that turn, then his effect is kind of doo-doo. But even if you hit like a Troll Chant, right, for 1 mana, but you didn't want to play that Troll Chant that turn, you still have a 1 mana Troll Chant, which I think is really, really good change. So I think overall this is a lot stronger. Even in the decks that already played Master Yi, this change is very good. Ornn now levels on Strike for 8, which means that it's probably easier to level Ornn. So when Ornn comes down level, that's obviously a lot stronger, right? One of Ornn's issue was that he had to strike once most of the times in order to level him, because most of the time he was leveling himself at 10. It was kind of hard to level him before turn 7 with another unit, but now with 8, I think that's a lot more doable. And so if Ornn comes down leveled and has like the Forge thing, I think, you know, that's a decent game finisher. Like, that's like Tryndamere on like roids somewhat. So I think this overall is just very, very good, right? You play like a 5 mana, you play like a 5/5, and then you can like Fury of the North for +3. You could play like Alpha Wildclaw and give it any weapon to like 8. Or you can like Wildclaw Ferocity on a equipped unit and level Ornn that way. Like, there's a lot of interesting ways to actually level Ornn now and then drop him level, which I think is really good for Ornn's archetype overall, because Ornn's very powerful when he's leveled, not very powerful when he's not. So quite nice change to Ornn. Wayne, though, this change is, I think, one of I don't know if this is more insane than Fiora, but it's up there. Swain gets 1 extra power as like a 5 mana 4/6 fearsome, but then he gains overwhelm on level 2 because Swain still has his ability that on Nexus Strike he deals 3 damage to all enemies and the enemy Nexus. The issue with that beforehand was that your opponent could block it. Granted that they needed fearsome blockers and you could like kind of stun the strongest units before the attack, but now you just have overwhelm. Like what the fuck is that? Like I think this is like one of the most insane changes. Like in terms of like what the base card was before. Fiora I thought was going to take the cake, but no, I think Swain is fucking insane. Like what is this? Like when Swain hits a Nexus once, most times you kind of just win the game. You can do cute things like play Might on Swain to kind of cheese your opponent, but now you just don't need to do that, and Swain gets 1 power so that 4 health units can't block Swain anymore and prevent the Nexus Strike. Like I don't know. this is so insane. Now against Ionia meta again, you know, Swain's never hitting. So it's hard to say the impact on this meta, but if you're not playing into exactly Ionia, I think the Swain is absolutely going to curb stomp you as any sort of board based deck. Allowing back to 1/6. It's cool, but we kind of gutted Sermon, we kind of gutted Tentacle Smash, we kind of gutted Bard. It's hard to see where Alawi kind of fits back in, and Alawi dies the quietest as well, right? Oh, I don't think Alawi is making it back in, especially given the fact that her package has been mostly kind of decimated. But, you know, we get 1/6 Alawi back. Cool. Bonus buffs. Lua. Lua used to give an ally a spell shield and overwhelm for the round, but now it gives either or, and it's a grant. So essentially it's like a 3 mana grant, spell shield, or overwhelm, which is obviously really good, right? Because it curves into like Pantheon decks for like overwhelm, especially given the fact that Zenith Blade was nerfed. And now I can use this instead of Zenith Blade as like a unit, and you can proc Fade, you can give overwhelm, and sometimes you can give spell shield, which is really good. Like this is good in the archetype it's good for, and this buff is really cool. Overall, very happy. Paper Tree. When an ally with attachment attacks, grant the attachment +1/+0. So now it's buffing the attachment and not the ally. Full change doesn't really matter. The rock tree and the Cinder tree better watch out. I mean underrated jokes. I've been reading the jokes, but these have been underrated. Shrieking Spinner, 4 mana 2/4. Instead of giving allies, Spire allies +1/+1, now gives them +2/+0. This is kind of where I was like talking a little bit about where Spiders is now losing Decimate, which is their finisher, but now they're gaining mid-range ground, right? You can play Shrieking Spinner as a 4-drop, which if you have a wide spider board with like Elise plus House Spider, bam, all of a sudden you just basically played Brothers Bond on all of your spiders, and that's really insane in terms of pressure. Doesn't mean that you're weaker into cards like Withering Well and Avalanche, but into other board-based decks, you have a really powerful effect, because this is a 4 mana 4/4 essentially if you get an attack that buffs your board. I think this card is like really good, and I like the direction, or at least it's like give and take, right? You nerf Decimate, but you increase the power level of existing aggro decks by giving them a little bit more mid-range boost, right? And so now you're allowing these decks to get more damage in on board and rely less on burn. Ritual of Renewal, down to a 4, heal 4, draw 1 for 4. I mean, it's like star shaping, right? Slow speed star shaping. You can't generate it anymore, which means that if you want to play this card, you have to main deck it. Would you want to play this card? I don't know. Probably not. Next card. Ripper's Bay. Oh, this is a really interesting one. So Ripper's Bay now reads when allies attack before activating Lurk, grant the top ally in your deck Lurk, and it becomes a Lurker. In the past, Ripper's Bay would just obliterate the top card if it wasn't a Lurker. But now, if you have a unit on the top of your deck, even if it doesn't have Lurk, you'll give it Lurk, it'll gain the stat buffs of Lurk, and you'll proc Lurk, which I think is really cool. When I was talking about Nocturne, when we were removing ties of boundaries of archetypes, this is huge. You no longer have to play units with a Lurk keyword and a Lurk deck if you have Ripper's Bay on board. Now, granted that Ripper's Bay is still 1 mana, not a unit that can't attack on turn 1, and is a 1 mana do nothing, which, you know, is maybe not what Lurk wants. But if there's enough of a unit payoff for a Lurk deck, that could be really good. And someone also mentioned that you don't have to play this in a Lurk deck anymore. You just play this in like an elusive deck, and all of a sudden you're always giving that top ally extra stat boosts as long as you kind of draw it. So you can kind of scale your units indefinitely over time, which is very interesting. Now obviously, like, it only buffs when you attack, so you're only getting that buff every other turn. So this card overall in a non-Lurk deck is probably still very slow. But what if you're like playing this like Lurk elusive aggro? I don't know. Maybe you can play Lurk decks that aren't restricted to Pike Rek'Sai. But the idea of that I think is very cool and very enticing in terms of game design. And so I like this change. I don't know if it's good with this change, but it's become a lot more interesting, and maybe it's not fundamentally a Lurk card anymore. Or if it is an alert deck, you get a lot more freedom in how you want to build it, because now you're not necessarily forced to go into Shrima. Playing Leviathan, 7 mana, but it's a 5/7 and only pings Nexus twice. I mean, overall, I think this is a buff. Like, not being able to stun 3 things is definitely impactful, but getting it down 1 turn earlier, I think is a huge upside to it. So overall, Swain getting Overwhelm, Leviathan buff, like, Swain is kind of insane, I think. Like, Swain could be very, very scary. I'm very interested in trying to build something with Swain. Some other miscellaneous. Magical Journey is a 2 mana, plant a Mysterious Port in top 4 cards, and then also Chime on the top card of your deck. It used to plant 3 cards randomly into your deck, but now it plants a Chime on top of your deck. So it's basically like an Esmus without the body. It's like a delayed Esmus, right? Because you're getting the portal later, but you're also getting the Chime on top. It's interesting. I think it's a very solid card. Doesn't draw, and this card wasn't really played before. Guaranteed Chime on top maybe is good. I'm not so sold on this, but Realm Caretaker has additional health. Now 4 mana, 6 mana, 4/5. I'm not sure if that was like the biggest issue of that card, but I think, again, when I talk about buffs to this, it just like raises awareness of cards like this, and maybe people are willing to try it out, especially the people that try to innovate decks, and then if it catches on fire, then all of a sudden it kind of just takes off. So very interesting, because I think this is a really cool card. Each round, the first time one of your traps or boons activates, give all allies +1/+1 and impact this round. Like, it's a decent sort of finisher card for like these like go wide archetypes. So very curious. And I think, oh, a few more. Grumpy Rock Bear, 5 mana, 5/5. Thick. Gunsmith, 4 mana, 2/3. Thick. Mammoth Shaman. From a 4/4 to a 5/5, and then Rager from a 6/6 to a 7/7. So it just gets 1 extra buff. They say it's like an Ash LeBlanc buff, but like this card was never really coming down unless it was leveled. Very rarely do you want to like engage it in combat on the turn you're trying to level it, just because if it dies, you lose the payoff. And if it was already leveled, or not leveled, but transformed, it's already an 8/8. Is this change very impactful? Probably not. But for against in some matchups where you don't really care about getting damage on Mammoth Shaman, like that's kind of scary. Deals 1 extra damage, so it's more likely to trigger the Nexus damage, and it survives more things. So, I mean, I think this card overall is very, very powerful against decks that can't do anything about it. Is this change going to change that fact? No. But in very niche situations, maybe it deals damage over 4 health unit. Maybe it survives over 4 attack unit. Windslinger, 6 mana, 3/3 elusive that says recall a unit, down from a 6 mana, 4/3 not elusive. Is this better? I don't know. This card was never played, and I don't think having elusive really changes that. Like, you always have Will of Ionia, you always have Homecoming, and unless Telestones or Homecoming is getting nerfed, like I don't really see a reason to run this card. Yeah, I don't know. Like, if this card wasn't run in the past, it's not going to be seen now just because it has elusive. Like, even it, like maybe it's like okay in like TF or like Nami Ionia. But even then, like, that's just very slow. You'd rather just play Homecoming, right? I don't really see this card being better, but I'm glad that they touched it at least. Go them. And then is that it? Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that's all of the changes that we're getting. I'm going to link the actual patch notes when I get the link, but I just want to do this now so I can get this out earlier. But I mean, in terms of changes, I mean, this patch was insane, right? We got Hench, like all the champion buffs I think are absolutely crazy. Fior, absolutely insane. Master Yi, absolutely insane. Ornn, pretty cool. Swain, absolutely insane. What else? And the nerfs very like on par, right? Like Sermon, good nerf. Decimate, sure. Viego, I think Elise is on par. These are like good. Like complete rework of Daybreak as an archetype. And like it's so interesting. There's so many new things going on, given that we have seasonals coming up in 2 weeks, I believe. Like there haven't really been nerfs to many Ionia decks. Nami for the most part has been untouched. I guess Ezreal Kennen is probably no longer going to see play. Karma, no change. And the aggro decks that traditionally did pretty okay in Ionia decks, like Pirates, definitely got hit a lot, double hit with the changes to Decimate as well as Sermon. So Ionia is going to gain a lot of favor. And some of the faster decks that traditionally dealt with Ionia are definitely getting nerfed. Because like when you try to go for a more mid-range game plan against Ionia, I don't think it really works out that very well. But I'm very curious to see. Like Fearsomes overall like do well in Ionia, so maybe Nocturne is like the secret sauce. I'm gonna expect to see a lot increase in like rally decks to try to combat like the Ionia menace. Swain, Fiora, like Fiora and Swain, like these are probably going to break the meta in some form, or at least you'll see meta decks appearing. Would be my guess. Master Yi and Kench I think have potential, but I'll be curious to see where they come up. Nocturne I think might be pulled away from Nightfall in some more fearsome aggro style of deck. And then Leona is probably the most interesting one for me because it's probably the one I'm hyped the most about. Got this rework, like this complete rehaul in his archetype. So I'm going to try to make that work as well. But I've been talking for a very long time. I'm still sick, so I'm gonna end the video here. Let me guys know what you guys are most interested for in this coming patch, because I mean there's a lot of fucking changes and a lot of in-path ones as well. So let me know down in the comments below and I'll reply to as many as I can. But thank you guys so much for tuning in the channel. Hope you guys are very excited for tomorrow. Can't wait for the patch, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out guys, have a good one.